Welcome to the SciTech Innovation Center here at UWRF. It may be, for some of you, the first time being in the building. I'd like to introduce you to the section that we're in right now, which is the University Business Collaboration Center, which we're very excited about. My name is Blaine Hoopert. I'm director of the UBCC, and we're, as I say, excited to have you here. UBCC, call it an invitation to collaborate. What I'm looking for are opportunities with businesses, other members of the community who might want to work with someone on campus here. Big project, small project, just an opportunity for our students to work with businesses and kind of close that gap between town and down and get things going. The items listed up here, I talked to some faculty members and they said these are the things that they could help with, but really it's any issue that you may have with a business. Really love the opportunity to work with you. But that's enough of a plug. I'm here to for our speaker series. When we put together the idea of the Innovator speakers, there was really only one name that we thought for our inaugural, and Jeff was kind enough to agree. When I called and asked Jeff to join us, I said, what we want to hear about is your brand of innovation. We have a lot of different types of innovation around, and so Jeff is going to share that with us today. Jeff Cernohous is local here to the area, so much so that he grew up, playing in the hills around the Man Valley Lab Farm. A graduate of UW River Falls, and he will be giving us some more of his background as part of his presentation, as he tells us about one entrepreneur's story, the road less traveled. Thank you.
So, yeah, I appreciate, turn this on. Hopefully you can hear me now. So I appreciate everybody coming out, braving the crappy weather. Hard to believe that just a couple of days ago was almost 60 degrees. But what I hope you get from this kind of tale, if you will, is kind of what shaped me as an innovator and helped me kind of build the skills throughout my career to achieve kind of the success that I have and my team has had over the years. And so there's several things in my office at the Tech Center just outside of Prescott, Wisconsin. One of them is a rubber frost poem, the road not taken. And so this is a famous one. 2 roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. And so that's where it's a little bit cliche, but I hope as I tell you my story, you'll see that there was several times where there was a fork in the road, and I did not go the road more traveled. I took the road less traveled, and it has made all the difference for me. So my story, you can't make it up. A lot of people don't believe it, and that's what makes it authentic. Because if you were spinning a tale, you probably would not tell it the same way. Just kind of my background, I think, as Blaine mentioned, I grew up on a dairy farm here in River Falls, Wisconsin. One thing I was sure of, I wasn't not going to farm. Nothing against the ag program here. My brother's in the audience here, too. I'm pretty sure he feels the same. We were not going to run cattle. It was not in our DNA. It was a hard time in the 80s to farm, and it was hard work, but it did teach me the value of hard work. I went to River Falls High School, and basically then went to River Falls here. I was here at River Falls between 1989 and 93. I went off to get a PhD in organic chemistry at Minnesota. And I'll tell you more details about that. I thought the job I wanted for my career was, there's no pointer here, but that's okay, was to go work at 3M. My grandparents lived in a little house in St. Paul, and we used to drive by 3M on our way to go visit them, once a month or so, and I thought, what is that place? And then as I got a little bit older and there's a lot of people who work at 3M that are scattered around western Wisconsin here. And I noticed they were living much better lives than what, struggling in a dairy farm. So I thought, that might be a pretty good place to work. And so I had it in my mind from the time I was a young, 10, 12 years old, that's pretty much where I hope to land. I took a diversion. After 6 years at 3M, I left and started a business on my own, and I'll tell you that story. That business was acquired by Stratasys in 2014. And then I started again in 2016, 2017, and that business was acquired by a Japanese company, Nagase, in 2020. So, personal stuff, I've been married to my high school sweetheart for 34 years. We have 3 kids. You'll see a big age discrepancy. We were 18 when we had our first. It wasn't planned. My joke is I have 2 sets of kids and 1 wife. So, or same wife. And so my oldest has just started a business I'll tell you a little bit about in River Falls here. I've got 3 grandkids, so 7, 5, and 2 that basically keep me going and keep me feeling young. I like to read, ski, travel. I've got a thing for red wine. And I'm an organic chemist that doesn't get to, do organic chemistry anymore. So I cook, and I cook, and I cook. So I have to do something for a relief that is still mixing, components together. There's over 100 patents that are in my name, and they range a whole variety of different areas, and those have led to, I think now the total is about almost $10 billion worth of products developed. So it's, again, wasn't a singular story or method. I would say that it was, my wife always says to me, can't you ever follow my train of thought? And the answer is no, because my brain's not wired that way. I'm a very divergent thinker. And so that's led to very differentiated solutions over the years. So why am I still working? I would drive Kristi crazy at home if I was there. I'm 54. And I need a big challenge. I'm not ready to give it up here. So right now I'm working with a 194-year-old company that I'm the first, I'm their diversity play, okay? I'm the only executive officer at this $8 billion company that's not Japanese. So these were the divergent roads. So I was a high school athlete, a pretty good one. I was probably too short and too slow to play D1. But I went to high school to play high school sports, just to be honest. It's not that I was a good student, but I went to high school to play high school sports. I played basketball, football, and also baseball. However, as I mentioned, the first kind of fork in the road, I wanted to go to UW-Madison, but life throws you curveballs. And so Brandon was born on senior skip day. And so that made me really take a hard look at what am I doing this for? And I decided no college sports for me. I needed to buckle down, figure out where I could get a degree that was a good value, and try to get myself out into the world. So I went to River Falls here, only school I applied to, and I spent 4 years running around, primarily Centennial Science Hall, while I got my chemistry major. I'll tell the story, but I went and got a PhD at Minnesota in organic chemistry. There was a fork in the road where I almost decided to go to law school. So I was very close to becoming a patent attorney. And I dread to think what it would have had. Not that I wouldn't have been a good patent attorney, but I don't think I would have been able to have the impact as a patent attorney versus the direction that I went. I was set pretty much for life at 3M. It was plugging around, going very smoothly. I was prolific. I got promoted, multiple times in my first 5 years there. But they didn't have the job I wanted. I wanted to still be able to do research and also lead. And you had to make a decision at 3M, whether you wanted to go into management or you wanted to stay technical. And I wanted both. So I left, and so that was another path. Ran into Bob Cervenka, the owner of Phillips Plastics, and we hit it off. Like, I don't know what to say. We were best buds almost from day one. And I'll tell the details of that story. He desperately wanted me to be his CTO. Desperately. And I left. And to follow my dream, when Stratasys acquired my business, again, I could still be working for Stratasys. It's a very interesting company. They would have paid me a ton, but I had more to give. And so I restarted. And then at Nagase, I think I've been with this company now for almost 6 years, partnered. And I don't know if there's another road yet. College decisions. So 1989 to 93. So again, I talked about all this. I only applied to one college, that was River Falls. I got in, thankfully. I was lucky enough to be a good student despite the fact that I didn't open a book in high school, not one. Except if I had to read something for like a lit class. I was blessed with a very good memory. Some of my buddies on the football team said, I don't get it. How can you look at something and just know it? And I can't, that's nothing that I would train myself to do or anything like that. I just was blessed. I worked multiple jobs through college, almost full time, every night. I was a school bus driver. I was a custodian. I got into 3M as a custodian. And so I worked nights. It was a kind of 5 to 9, so I was always taking 8 a.m. classes so I could get to work at night. And then after doing that for a year, I got into the dental products division as a technical aide and did that for my last year before I went to graduate school. River Falls was a great education at a great price. But to be honest, college was a blur for me. I was a young parent. I was working. I was telling some of the kids that are students, that as we were over pizza, that I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I missed one of my classes. So, but I realized when I was at 3M as a tech aide, my observation was that at 3M, which was at the time, my goal to get into 3M, in order to do my own research, I had to have a PhD because, and I'll give you a good example. And when I finally got hired into 3M to the Adhesive Technology Center, there was about 120 people in that group. 100 were PhDs. And all working on next generation. It actually was too top heavy. There was too many PhDs in the room, okay? But 3M was incredibly biased toward PhDs. And so before I left, my supervisor, Steve Austin, he gave me some advice. I told him, he was a physical organic chemist from UW-Madison and was working on next generation dental adhesives. So a lot of the dental adhesives you have, if you go to the dentist and get a filling, he developed most of those from 3M. And he said, well, if you're really set on going into organic chemistry and want to come back to 3M, it's a good idea to learn something about polymers. And so I listened to that. And I did that, much to the dismay of my research group. But I did take the advice to heart. So grad school was kind of the first time school kicked me in the butt. And when I came in to graduate school, it was really the first time I felt like, I'm average. many of the professors here maybe had, I don't know your specific experience, but there's people that are coming from all over the world who've had, calculus when they were in 9th grade. You know what I mean? So it was the first time I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm behind. Not that I had a bad education locally here, but I thought, wow. And so I felt average when I came, and I had class burnout. I was on a 5-year plan, and I changed that to a 4-year plan. So I had 23, 21, and 6 credits my last year of school at River Falls while working every night. And so that's when I say it was a blur. It was a blur. And but I was the first graduate student. These are my research advisors, Tom Hoy, who most of his students, he's emeritus now, did natural product synthesis. So they were doing kind of design and synthesis of complex natural products for drugs. And Chris McCosco, who's a famous rheologist. So they're totally opposite, okay? Tom is probably the best teacher I've ever had. He would take time at the expense of his career, even though he's running a group of 20 or 25 graduate students, and sit down with you. If you brought him an NMR, he'd sit with you for an hour and a half to try to figure out what's going on there. He loved the puzzle. He loved that aspect. He was the worst administrator you've ever seen in your life. I saw his office. They had to give him another office at Minnesota because it's a maze. Wandering through all the journal articles and all the things that he wants to read. So they literally had to give him another office across the hallway. A wonderful human being. Chris was an incredible manager. They're both brilliant in their own way. Chris ran his group like clockwork. Chris could get money like you couldn't believe. So he'd call up Dow, he'd have $500,000 the next day. Just like that, money was easy for him. Now granted, he was in the #1 chemical engineering program in the United States at the time, so that didn't hurt. But he was an incredible manager. So I had early on the advantage of working with, it's like spouses, 2 polar opposite people. And it was maddening, but it was also incredible training for me to try to figure out how to navigate that. I only had to do this because I was a chemistry student. Chemistry students didn't write a research dossier, but engineering students did. So Chris made me do it. So the feedback I got from my committee, I was a great creative writer, okay? Very creative guy. It reads like a storybook, should you even be in science? So that was after my first year. And I'm thinking, oh, that wasn't really great. That wasn't the best feedback. Your second year at Minnesota, at the end of your second year, the oral examination had to propose an original research idea. So, and I took the word original to mean original. Okay? That was a mistake. So you present this research idea after practicing it with your research group, and you take this research idea and basically present it to, I think I had 5 or 6 faculty on my oral exam committee. Let's just say faculty can make you look foolish if they want to. Sorry, faculty, but you know a lot more than people a couple years into their graduate work. And basically, after the oral exam I failed, McCosco said, "What were you thinking? Couldn't you propose something simple? Not differentiated?" And I had proposed something that was basically stereoselective synthesis using excimer-induced enantioselectivity, which is, it sounds crazy. I'm studying polymer, I'm on the polymer project, okay? So it was even outside of the field that I was focused on. Even though my research group, I was going to group meetings, every Tuesday night for 4 hours and talking about these kinds of things. And so through all of this, my research was going great. That part was going awesome. I was productive, I was making progress, that part was going really well. But after I failed my oral exam, I went back to my car and just broke down. And I asked myself the question, is this really for me? And on the one hand, I loved graduate school. On the other hand, I felt like, okay, I'm obviously deficient. I'm not up for it. So I applied to law school, got in right away at the University of Minnesota Patent Law School, was this close to going. And Tom called me in his office one day and he said, you can be successful in whatever you do, but before you leave, understand, I've had over 220 students and you're in the top 10% of them from a creativity standpoint. And I'm sorry, I still to this day, it has an impact on me. So he's the reason why I took that road. It wasn't any of the program, it wasn't it was that advice from someone who I considered and looked up to as a mentor. And so I stayed. And I proposed an idiotic idea for my second oral exam. It was just a little improvement over and using a technique to do something. And they loved it. There was no questions. And during that time, I published 6 papers in 3 years. For those of you in graduate school know that's an accomplishment, especially in organic physics and organic chemistry. My senior year, my 4th year, my first oral exam idea that was failed was published in the Journal of American Chemical Society by another group. So that was kind of vindication. At the time, some of my colleagues, students were saying, oh, you should send it back to those efforts. You should send it to your whole committee. I didn't. But what it really taught me, as in hindsight, as I go through went through that process, it taught me resilience. And I was upset about it for quite a bit of time. But then today I look back and think, I don't know that I'd be here today in the same way if I hadn't had that experience. So then, at the end of my 3rd year, I got a call from a good friend of mine, Ashish Kampur. And Ashish and I published some papers together. He was in the McCosco group. And he used to call me Jeffrey J. And Ashish is brilliant. So he's from India, obviously. When he took his college entrance exams, there was something like 1 million plus students his same year that took the same exam. He was number 3 in all of India. And so he said to me, he called me up out of the blue, I'm 3 years in. He said, I know it's early for you, but the 3M Adhesive Technology Center has interviewed 25 people for an open position, and they can't offer any of them. They haven't offered any of them. And here's the problem. I mentioned there's 100 PhDs. When a candidate would come through, it's almost worse than an academic committee. You have to please like 20 people. It's like 2 straight days of interviews. And 3M was the most competitive environment I've ever experienced in my life, more so than graduate school. And so he said, send a resume if you're interested. 1 year later, I got the job. And 1 year later, I joined the Adhesive Tech Center, much to my advisor's dismay, because I didn't ask them if I could leave. The professors are laughing here. I just said, hey, I got a job. Let me know how much longer I have to stay, and we negotiated, and I stayed another year. 3M kept the offer for a year, and then I walked in. But before I left, McCosco said to me, Cernohous is an unusual name, and people remember it. Make sure you do good by it. It's not Johnson. It's not Smith. You can't hide behind that name. And it was a really good piece of advice. Now, a side note, Ashish, he rose up through 3M's ranks. That's one of his poster shots from when he was an executive. He was number 2 at 3M before he decided to take the CEO role at Avient. He still invites me over sometimes. We drink cognac. It's the only time I ever drink cognac is at Ashish's. So some of the things I really, really learned in graduate school, and you can see resilience. I went through hell and back, but I was better, because I in that case I stayed on the road, despite the bumps in the road. Network. A lot of people I know in graduate school have often relied on their advisor to help them network or to get a job. You can see it was somebody that I knew and worked with and built rapport with. And that's been a secret to my success throughout. It's now a global network. And between people who will basically, if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. It's as simple as that. And differentiation. As I mentioned, I was the only student running around this natural product synthesis group working on polymers. Polymers, to most of my colleagues, were the failed experiment in the bottom of the flask when all hell broke loose, okay? That was thrown out. And here I am trying to make highly specific precision polymers with a single controlled functional group on the end for model reactive compatibilization experiments. So 3M. 3M, I loved so many aspects of 3M. Blaine can probably tell you all the good, the bad, and the ugly at 3M. When I was there was about 80,000 people. 3M was kind of, I'll say, stronger at that time than it is today. They've gotten broken up, and the PFAS litigation has really hurt them. But I learned many, many things. I learned collaboration is key. 3M is incredibly complex. At the time, there were 60 business units. There was 8,000 technical people in St. Paul, in that campus. There was something like 1,500 PhDs. And it really was I don't know if Blaine feels the same way, but the inmates running the asylum, okay? Whatever executives would say, the inmates were running the asylum, okay? And that's where work got done, through this grassroots network of people that were like-minded. One time we used to do these events. There was a corporate scientist who was emeritus, George Tears. George Tears, he invented NMR, okay? Back at 3M in the late 40s. He still had a lab at 3M in the 90s. It was a hazardous waste dump, okay? The RH set people were freaked out about what George Tears was doing. The fire department would be called once a year. But George Tears was hilarious. He was funny. So Bill Coyne, who recently passed away but was our chief technology officer at 3M when I was there, he's a Hudson guy. He was a nice guy. But they did, the corporate scientists would throw an event every year where they'd invite up-and-coming young talent, young PhDs, to come present their work, and it was kind of a weekend event at this really, really nice resort. And so I got invited, and the keynote lecturer was Bill Coyne to talk about, his vision and 3M strategy. And George Tears showed up. And George Tears, if I'm Bill Coyne, George Tears sat right there. He sat right there. He had a pile of cookies that was like this big. So he's listening to Bill Coyne talk his corporate speak, and he's, ah! He's just laugh, and Bill Coyne's face is getting redder and redder and redder. And then finally, Tears says, I've heard this kind of bullshit for I don't know how many years. Why don't you just, go and let the corporate scientists figure out what really we should do for 3M for the next, 20. Coyne was just infuriated. But that was 3M. He didn't get fired. Not that they could get him to leave. I don't even think they paid him. So I learned collaboration was key. And to this day, I use a term when I give a leadership talk that I don't know if I coined, but I'm looking for visionary doers. And so when I'm looking for people that don't just have the vision, but are willing to roll up their sleeves and figure out a way to carry it out and get it done. And so there were people like that at 3M. 3M actually did studies to try to identify these people. And they have a term for them. They're called polymorphs, T-shaped people, who are extremely deep but are extremely broad and have the ability to basically hybridize and innovate across different fields of presumably unrelated areas. I learned just do it. So sometimes people ask me, how did you file so many patents in such a short amount of time? The secret was I made it easy. I wrote them all myself. So in the corporate system, every attorney has got their quota. The hardest part about filing a patent? It's writing the damn thing. So I removed that. I learned how to write them. I could give it right to the attorney, and then I almost didn't need management approval. If my management wouldn't do it, somebody else that I was collaborating with did. It made my technical director almost mentally insane. He said, Jeff, the ATC's only filed one of your patents. I said, well, that wasn't my decision. He's like, we're not getting any credit for the things that are happening. I said, well, file my patents. I also learned how to pitch in a very ultra-competitive environment. So they used to have a thing called the Tech Forum, and about once a year, I'd be asked to come pitch in front of, maybe 200 or so technical people, and almost every time somebody would stand up and say, that's not new. I did that 20 years ago. So my response was, okay, I don't want to repeat, I don't want to reinvent the wheel here, but how am I supposed to know that? How am I supposed to know that was done? Because the problem was at 3M at that time, everything was siloed in individuals. So when I left and built my company, every scientist in my company can see every experiment that's ever been done. Forever. And so, because that was just a pet peeve of mine, and it was incredibly inefficient. And the joke around the 3M ATC was that if a manager was assigned to me, they'd get promoted, because I had 7 managers in less than 6 years. Several of them became, very high executives. A couple of them were real doozies, but they still got promoted. So there was almost a battle for who was going to get Cernohous next at 3M. I also learned launching new products is difficult. There's pet projects and politics all around, and that large companies have a tendency to hire thinkers versus doers. This is, again, I grew up in a dairy farm. That's another secret to why I was so prolific. I was in the lab every day, myself. It's a funny story. My current chief operations officer, Andy Gillis, he when I had started Interfacial Solutions and just kind of got the business going over by the brewery in the Whitetail Ridge Industrial Park. It was a Friday afternoon. He walked in off the street. And I came out of the plant, and I saw him come in the door. It's about 3:30. And I said, "Can I help you?" And he said to me, "Yeah, I'm Andy Gillis. I'm from Hayward. I just relocated from Maryland." I said to him, okay. You got 30 seconds to impress me. It's been a long week." He's like, "Well, I was spying on North Korea for the NSA. I'd go to work and take an elevator down near the DMZ, 20 stories, and listen." I'm like, "Well, that's damn interesting. Let's talk." That guy's still with me today. But what was funny, about 3 years ago, I heard him tell the story. And he told the same part of the story, but what he told people was, this guy comes in out of the plant with a ripped shirt, full dirt from head to toe, tells me to impress him in 30 seconds. And I'm thinking, holy crap, they empower the operators here. He had no clue that I was the owner. And I had no clue that was his perspective. Anyway. But at 3M, they would always hire PhDs over bachelor's people, not because it was really a cost thing. There was this inherent bias that a PhD, that if you really looked at the fully loaded cost of a person, the delta between a PhD and a bachelor's person, when you figured in the cost to have them have a lab, blah, 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 it wasn't that different. So they said, let's just hire the smart people. No offense to people just getting a bachelor's degree, but that was their arrogance. It is a totally screwed up strategy to create an organization, because the ATC, people were arguing about resources and what to do more than actually doing anything. So I also learned that large companies can have a family culture. Even though it's 80,000 people, if you were still part of that inherent family culture that kind of bonded you almost for life. Even to this day, somebody will say, "Oh, you worked at 3M, do you know so-and-so?" I'm like, I haven't been there since 1997. Sorry, I don't know so-and-so. And I also realized that I mentioned the position I wanted didn't exist. So I took the leap. My wife was a forensic scientist at the time for the state crime lab. She was on a complex crime scene that was a kidnapping and an assault on the southern Minnesota border and into Iowa. And so feds were involved. It was very complicated. So she was overnight. So I had the whole weekend to myself. Sitting around. We didn't have younger kids yet. You know, Brandon was probably 12, 13 years old. And she called me, said, "How's it going?" As she's on her way back. She's like, "We're just stopping, I'll be home later." I'm like, "I'm just typing my resignation." She's like, "Whoa!" She's like, "Are you sure? Maybe we should talk about this." I'm like, yeah. I'm 100% sure. And I believed, number one, that my ideas were worth more on the open market than at 3M. And that there was too many things at 3M that could get in the way of, I'll say, full realization of some of the things that I want to do. I also realized my last job at 3M was the first time I talked to a customer. So even though there's something called the McKnight principles at 3M that says get your best and brightest out to see not just what a customer's saying, but what they're doing, they kept their R&D people locked away and didn't want them to go to customers. So it was against the McKnight principles. So my last job before I left, I visited 40 customers that year, and I realized that most of them were not like 3M, and mostly in the plastics industry. And I didn't know much about plastics, but I arrogantly thought, I think I can help these people at 32 years old. And so I quit. on that. And I also felt that technology transfer was broken at 3M and other large organizations because they went away from a champion model. And teams are great, but sometimes it takes somebody to stick their neck out, put their job on the line, take all the blame and pass all the credit to make something happen. In a nutshell, that's my innovation story. When we've done it for other people, I've said to the owners of these companies, you can blame me when we fail and take all the credit when you succeed. I'm here to just smooth it out. And it's really that simple. Because people that are within a company, they're worried about their job. They're worried about all kinds of other things that cause them to make decisions or maybe to settle or not take the risk. And so a good example of technology transfer, 3M had OLED technology in the late 80s. Never commercialized it. Never. They had the first OLEDs in the world. They had, back when I was there, a tape that you could put down on the table and would visually indicate if there was E. coli on the table. That's really complex to think about, single bacteria, amplification, in an adhesive causing a colorimetric response. Never commercialized. Could you imagine what would have been if they had that during COVID? Now granted, virus is different than bacteria, but they were filled with technology and so little was getting through that I didn't want to be stuck in that rut. So I felt I could be this external technology champion and build a team that was, instead of all PhDs, just a couple, and then an organization that executed. And that's what we did. So I started in my garage. I had $80,000 saved in my 401k. Kristi agreed to let me cash it. And the deal I had with her was I had to get a real job and the money was gone. That was in 2003. And the problem was we couldn't live on her salary. As many of you know, state employees don't make a lot. I'm sorry to rub it in. But we could, I was making $110,000 a year in 2003 at 3M. And so to walk away from that, unfortunately, we weren't living a $35,000 lifestyle, which was kind of what she was making at the state. And so we were minus $4K a month. You don't have to do much math to realize my $80K after I pay the taxes, the penalty for taking it out, wasn't going to last long. I wasted $25,000 in the first 2 weeks on an idea. Got zero. It was a great idea on paper, and I realized I had no clue what it took to commercialize and how much it cost to launch new products. So I was freaking out, and I called a former 3Mer that at 3M, if you worked your whole career, got to middle management, saved, you'd have your house paid off, you'd have a couple $1 million in the bank, you'd have a pension. And so a good friend of mine who we worked with, we had commercialized some products together. His name is John Harrison. And I reached out to John. I said, John, I'm desperate. I'm going to need money or I'm going to have to run back and work for the band again. Can you? How about it? And I knew nothing about raising money. I said, how about you give me $25,000, I'll give you 25% of the company. He said to me, and no kidding, that'd be the stupidest thing in the world for me to do. But I know a guy who doesn't think like a normal person that you should call. And he told me to call Bob Cervenka. And so I got out of that. Resilience. Got out of that meeting. I called up Phillips that minute, as soon as I got home. I got Bruce Siebold, who some of you know Bruce Siebold. He was their tech director at the time. And he said to me, oh, 3M, local, PhD, why don't you come in tomorrow and meet Bob? I'm thinking, what? If I wanted to talk to an executive at 3M, and I told my manager that, it would have caused a storm. It would have taken months. They would have interrogated me. What am I going to say? Why do you want to talk to them? And here, I get invited the next day. I walk into their beautiful conference room, which is my tech center now, and I pitch. I pitch my idea in the composite decking industry. It was booming at the time for some materials for that industry, which we've now actually created probably a couple $2 billion of products for that industry. And I didn't think it was going well. I was used to full-on aggressive engagement at 3M, telling me what I was an idiot about, throughout the whole presentation. I was getting like softball questions. What about this market, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm thinking, and then Bob, for those of you who had ever met him, he was about 6'6". He was maybe about upper 60s at the time, extremely stately. And he sat, and he didn't make eye contact. He wasn't an eye contact. I didn't know any of this. So he was just sitting there like this. And I thought, I'm bombing. You know what I mean? I thought, I'm totally bombing. And 50 minutes in, and we're wrapping up, and he looks at me and says, I'm sorry, I've got to go to my next meeting. He gets up and starts to walk out of the room. And he turns back and he's like, I just have one question for you. Why did you leave 3M? That was his only question. I said, well, there's a lot of reasons, but high level, the thing that really got me was when they put Six Sigma processes over the R&D organization. He looked at me, and he said, Six Sigma on R&D. What a joke! How about if I incubate your company, Time and Materials for Minority Equity? And he walked out the door. And then we floated on a handshake for 2 years. Okay, I won't go into all that story. That's over a beer story. But anyway, in one meeting with the right individual, I had a lifeline. So what I learned about Bob was that he founded Phillips Plastics when he was 27. He built it to $300 million of sales over 45 years. All of his 14 facilities were in Wisconsin. Even when everybody else was being pushed to Asia, to Europe, he had about 2,000 people that worked for him. He had a people-focused culture. On all of his plant walls were all people are important, and people working together achieve more. And it was the first time. The other thing, the reason I left 3M, is we had hired a guy from GE for the first time, outside CEO named McNerney. And immediately he implemented a 10% rule, which 3M probably had some people that weren't pulling their weight. But the idea is you get rid of your bottom 10% every year. And the way it was handled, there were people that had contributed hundreds of millions of dollars to the company that were pushed out. And I just felt it was wrong. And so, anyway, I got to know Bob. It was a crazy 2 years of working with Phillips. I would get a call in the middle of the afternoon and from his assistant, Sherry, and she'd say, oh, Jeff, could you meet Bob at the Red Wing Airport tomorrow morning at 8? I'm like, okay. Bob had 2 private jets, okay? So I'd show up in my little Volkswagen Jetta, park the car, the jet comes in, Bob doesn't come out, one of his handlers would say, oh, hey, get in the plane. I'm like, okay. So we get in the plane, we take off. I don't know where the hell we're going. I don't know what this is about. We go up, and then we're going right back down. I'm like, okay. We're landing in Winona to visit the owner of RTP, Hugh Miller. I still don't know what the purpose of this meeting is. RTP, Bob was a good customer of RTP. He bought about $20 million of resin from him every year. So when Bob shows up, Hugh Miller shows up. We tour the plants and we get to the conference room. I still don't know what's going on. And then Bob turns to me and says, Jeff, why don't you tell him about yourself? And I'm like, okay. So I tell him about myself. And then we leave, get back in the plane, fly back to Red Wing, and I go on my way. The whole point was I realized that Bob and I were a lot alike, but I was just starting. He had already made it. He was having fun. He was showing off to his buddies. Oh, I got a smart guy who's traveling around with me. Literally, that's what was going on. And I'm thinking, oh no, what's going on here? And so Bob was, I told you we had a handshake. We had a handshake and a consulting agreement where I owned all the patents, the intellectual property, because he blew a covenant on his bank back in 2001, something called a operating line of credit, that he got overextended. And the bank knew Bob liked to take money off the company and start new stuff. It turned out he had a whole bunch of retired 3Mers running around his technology center, doing crazy stuff. And he's pumping millions of dollars into it. And, and so the bank put in a covenant that said, you can't do that. You can't take money off the core and start any new companies. So we had kind of a little bit of a standoff here where I said, well, you have pledged equity in my company. My word is good, so I'm not signing the company over or the intellectual property until we come to terms. In the meantime, it was clear Bob started introducing me as a CTO on these jaunts. I didn't work for the company. I wasn't on payroll. And so one day, shaking in my boots, I walked into his office and said, Bob, I appreciate everything you've done. I love you like a father, but I don't want to be your partner. And I literally didn't know how this was going to go. He said, I completely understand. What can I do to help? So again, it's another one of these roads that if I hadn't done that, I would have been the CTO of Philips. Which wouldn't have been a bad gig, but it wouldn't have been the same gig. So we did a horse trade on a license, and he gave me back my equity, the company that was totally dependent on him at the time. We shared staff. Jennifer Geiger, who's been with me since that time, was an admin at Philips. She's my VP of HR. And he had a little 5,000 square foot facility near Fleet Farm in Hudson that was empty. So I got that for free. My brother knows, he worked, he worked there when we got started. So after that, the next step, it was really kind of taking what I learned at Philips, connecting my network, and solving problems and creating an organization that was really efficient at that in material science. And a lot of these people are still with me today from that team that was highly successful. And so we were profitable every year. After Philips, we grew 50% compound annual growth. We launched more than 50 products for customers. They were funding it, so we weren't getting the benefit of those products, but we were developing the technology. And they were paying us to do that. Those customers invested about $20 million. It's about over a 50-to-1 return. This is why the former owner of Fiberon still calls me up today when he's got some problem. He made $600 million in the sale of his business. He calls me when, even though I'm not even in this game anymore, oh, Jeff, I desperately need your help. The company grew from 0 to 6 million in about 10 years. I paid myself below market for 6. So that's another thing, people who think it's all easy, it's not. My first 3 years, I paid myself $50,000 a year on average. And we scraped by the best we could. The other problem was most of my net worth at the time was in the business. Okay, I hadn't really recaptured. So I was at a career crossroads. And I won't go too late. I think I'll be able to finish up pretty much in time here. So I worked extremely hard for 10 years. I was tired. I took on 2 executive partners who I couldn't afford. They were former 3Mers. each at the time making about $500,000 a year, and I could only afford to pay them about half of that. So I had protected the equity in the company, and they were earning equity for that other gap in their salary. And after about a year, my top customers were so pissed off because one of my partners was great. He was a wonderful 3M executive. He treated my customers like we were 3M. And that he could tell them, hey, we're doing it this way. I'm sorry, we can't do that. And so my staff was also unhappy. I had started up, we built the substrates plant just down the street, or had raised some money to do that, and I needed cash for startup. It was an $8 million investment. And I thought to myself, how can I resolve these issues? So Stratasys was a customer of ours. And some people think I'm an evil, maniacal genius because I sold the business to Stratasys. I knew they didn't care about my business. I called them up. I knew they cared about our capabilities. So I called them up. They were making crazy investments at the time. And they had invested $1 billion the previous year in acquisitions. I made a call to their VP of R&D over a happy hour, and the business sold for that price that we agreed to at that happy hour, within 1% of it, minus what we paid lawyers and accountants. And then the question was, did I really fit into this new organization? Stratasys was this amalgamation of companies that really weren't put together properly. We really got along with the former Stratasys team, which was primarily who we were working with in Eden Prairie, but they were a hostile merger with an Israeli team. And the Israeli people are great, but it's a different culture than Minnesota Nice, just to say. So my team really didn't work well with that, and I didn't. They had penciled me in as the CTO, but nobody asked me. I thought, well, that's a bit weird. So part of the deal was to keep the brand name, because I knew they didn't care about the company. I worked for free for 2 years. And the way I got paid, they agreed to pay me $25,000 for every patent. I wrote 10 patents in 2 years. So that was my pay for the 2 years. So I started again, but this time with capital. The safe play, this was another divergent, was to stay with Stratasys and continue as an executive. I had plenty of money, but I knew they didn't care about my customers. I now had capital to do it better. And we were bootstrapped to the point of, like, you couldn't believe, where I'm watching, how much tape did we buy last month? So I was able to restart Interfacial and win back customers within a year after leaving Stratasys. I merged the Magma business bought out my VCs, and it became my substrates business in 2019. We grew to $10 million of revenue in 3 years, but we weren't cash flow positive. There was one thing in 3D printing that I cared about, and that was this high temperature support material. The reason I cared about it is the founder of Stratasys, Scott Crump, told me to my face while drinking, there's no way you could ever do it. It's impossible. So I bought a machine for $250,000 called a Freeformer. We ran 2,000 materials, experiments in a summer. And I won't go into all the details about 3D printing, but it could use pellets instead of filament. And less than 3 years after the transaction with them, I brought this to them in a package saying, here you go. And they said, no, we don't want it. So I'm like, oh no, I thought you'd want it. Apparently it was too soon after paying too much money for the company. I needed a new partner. So this is the history of the revenue. You can see phase one, where we were starting to plateau. It's because we were a service kind of industry business primarily. It's really, really hard to scale services. It's relying on kind of constantly hunting for new projects, and even if you're successful, the best you can hope for is another project at that scale on a new project the next year. So we had kind of plateaued. Second generation, we focused on proprietary products. Every Amazon vehicle has our floor in it. It's made from recycled plastics that we manufacture in River Falls. As an example, we built that initial technology here. It didn't go with Stratasys because they didn't care about substrates. So Interfacial 2.0 this year will be about $32 million. Here's where we are today. That's the former Phillips Plastics Tech Center. On the top there, it's about 40,000 square feet, overlooks the Mississippi River. We have 70 3D printers there. We have a full material science lab. And there's about 30 or so people that work there. We just bought a biotech team from BASF in San Diego. That is 13 really smart people that are working primarily on high throughput biotechnology. We have a 100,000 square foot compounding facility in River Falls, and then the substrates facility down here, about 90 people. So my intention was kind of to grow Interfacial and not sell it until I wanted to just keep doing it until I retired. And maybe beyond, maybe it was my family would take over. That was kind of the plan. However, I needed a partner to launch the 3D printing business. And I also needed to pay back my substrates investors. I kind of did a deal with them, and I had a period of time where I had to pay them back $5 million. Someone from Nagase walked into my headquarters in 2017. I had no idea who they were. I never heard of them. And it turned out, we found out that in that support material, we were using something called Cernohous, which they were the commercial manufacturer of. They made by fermentation, breakdown of starch. It's a disaccharide. And it's a very unique sugar. They primarily sell into food. We were totally shocked. We were buying it off of Amazon, okay? We had no idea where it came from, this company in Japan. And that led to discussion, and it turned out we were referred to them by two Stratasys executives who were consulting, who had left Stratasys. That led to a joint venture in 2018. And in 2019, I got invited out to a boondoggle in Breckenridge for our joint venture with a bunch of customers. I'm like, okay, Brad, I really don't have time for this. I like to ski, but it was just in the worst time. And Brad, who he's the CEO of Nagase America now, he was handling M&A then. He is like a insane skier. So I followed him all day long at Vail on black and double black diamonds. I was gassed. I didn't fall, but I was like, I'm going home. So I said, I was supposed to stay another day. I'm like, I'm going home. I can hardly walk. And so I called my Uber, which is a 2-hour Uber from Breckenridge. And while I'm waiting for the Uber, their VP of marketing comes up to me and starts asking about why I left Stratasys. Would I ever consider working for a big company again? I'm like, oh, great, they want to buy me, And so I'm like, well, maybe, Nagase's been a good partner, but I don't know. You guys are 190 years old. I'm not sure. And so they called me back to their New York City headquarters in the Americas in June of that year, 2019. And I was going to offer just maybe they'd make a small investment. We weren't quite cash flow positive. I still had some capital. I'm like, why don't you just put $5 million in, maybe with an option? Brad's like, we're owners. We're not minority investors. Tell me what it's going to take. And I wasn't ready for that question, to be really honest. And I was trying to discourage them because I'd been through due diligence and I'd been through the process of selling a business with, a very multinational firm. And I knew we weren't going to make it through. All right, so highly suspected this was not going to happen. So I threw out a stupid number. I said, Brad, stop. It's going to be more than 50 million, so just go away. He called me back 2 weeks later and said, we're cool. We're good. I'm like, what are you talking about? So the business transacted March 19th 2020, right when COVID went wild. And my business was completely disrupted. The automotive industry shut off because of shortage of chips. And they've been great partners. And they've been patient, gracious, and helped us grow. You saw what we're doing. And their people-centric cultures are compatible. This is my last slide. So where am I going now? I'm 54. So they just named me their Chief Technology Officer. I'll start in April. Again, the first non-Japanese to be an executive officer at this company in 194 years. It's a big, wild experiment. 200 years old, and the goal is to help them transform. The reason they like me is I'm not motivated by the same social contract. I can operate outside their norms. And there's a lot of great things about the Japanese norms, but there's a lot of things that make it challenging. And so I'm a disruptor. Other things that keep me busy, I'm an angel investor in 4 companies. Obviously, SciTech, I'm supported here, and the U of M and local charities. I still like to invent. My grandkids, helping, coming over to the pool. And helping my younger sons start businesses. This is my oldest son, Brandon. He's in the former Air Motion Systems building, and he's got some cool robotic 3D printers. Some of you have been over there. His first year in business, he did about $500,000. We think it'll be $1 million next year. And I'm just a every other week lunch advisor. I don't have time, but it's really fun to see. I really love that stage of a business. And so the other Frost poem that's in my office is Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening, very apropos for today. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and I hope miles to go before I sleep. So thank you. I know I went a little bit over, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Jeff, as Jeff is getting the questions, I'm going to hand around a couple of clipboards. You've heard what Jeff had to say. We're going to be having more speakers. I'll speak to that in a second. But if you wouldn't mind providing us your name and email address, and check one of the boxes. Let us know if you'd like to us add your email address to our list for events like this, or if you'd like me to contact you about further interactions with the University Business Collaboration Center. Any questions for Jeff? Phenomenal presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking us through your story. As I said, your path through innovation. Question I had, can you talk a bit more about how River Falls, how your time here at UWRF, I know you said it was a blur.
It was a blur, but in hindsight, what I really appreciated was the individual kind of attention from the professors. The encouragement, despite everything. Dr. Rusterholz was my undergraduate research advisor, and kind of encouraged me to consider the Hoy Group. So, and honestly, the value was, I came out of college with less than $10,000 of student loans. My daughter-in-law went to pharmacy school, and she had $300,000 of student loans. So it's a great value. So I hope you guys all feel the same way. Still, it's crazy value.
Questions?
So what's the most important thing you learned from Oxford Banker, do you think?
I think the most important thing I learned from Bob was kind of the people-centric culture. And I also learned that having a people-centric culture didn't mean you didn't deal with poor performance. Because some people kind of mistake the idea of a people-centric culture, and actually my Japanese colleagues are like that. In Japan, it's kind of closer to tenure. It's employment for life. It's a social contract. It's how you deal with poor performance. decisions, or how you, so it's having like in my teams, I never want someone to be surprised. So if we're gonna, have to make a decision to part ways, and just don't want to talk about, cutting, but to build a really, really tight people-focused culture, it's how you respectfully deal with everyone, including the things in your organization that might not be working. You can still do it respectfully. So I would say that's what I learned. The most important thing I learned.
So Jeff,
Yeah.
I 100% agree with you of like, you can't regret the past, right?
No.
Like that, because you wouldn't be where you are today if
Right.
you didn't take those forks. But are there things that keep you up at night still that go, what if I went,
The other direction?
yeah, or a
I-
different direction that,
So maybe it's a superpower or it's a sickness, I don't know. I don't stay up at night about past decisions.
sure.
I do think that would I have done some things differently? Yeah. I mean, there were situations in the company where I felt like maybe we were becoming almost nepotistic, you know what I mean? Where we got too many families working in the company. And even though when families working in the company, the people from the family knew that they were always held to a higher standard, that's not really what people perceived. And I think some of that probably could have been architected and handled better, but the problem is most entrepreneurs trust and love and want to work with the people that they know will, go to battle on a hill with them. So I don't know. My kid's got he's starting off. It's another family business, and so I'm not saying it's just a now that we're growing to a $30 or $50 million company. I saw it at Philips too, where some of Bob's kids were working in the company, and it didn't matter if they were super employees. There just was always chatter that they got there because of Bob, no other reason. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
No, it's great.
one thing.
Well, so I see you're wearing the shirt,
Yes.
right? I'm sure along the way, someone told you you should go move this business somewhere else.
Hmm.
You could have told your kids, this isn't the place to start a business, go elsewhere, right?
Yep.
Why River Falls?
I think why River Falls, I'll be honest with you, there is that, coming back to the last question, my wife and I sometimes joke, wouldn't it have been great if we could have, moved to someplace else and done something, but so this is my home, and what's kind of driving me moving forward is to try to give back locally. I will say there are challenges, especially scaling a manufacturing business or with heavy manufacturing in River Falls. Not just the cost of labor, but just I don't know right now. We have a plan to double the business in the next 3 years. I'm not sure where the workforce is going to come from, just to be honest. I had a conversation with my chief operating officer today in our executive team meeting, and he made the comment to me, well, we'll be okay if we can just keep this person out of jail. And I'm like, what? What are we talking about here? And so, I kind of see that tongue in cheek, but some of the work we do is hard. And, we try to automate where we can. And maybe AI is going to change some of this too, but I can't use AI to do a lot of the manufacturing work that we're doing today. I'm up on AI, but I don't see it happening in the near future. So I want to get back here. I'd like to create more jobs here. I'd like to hire more students. I'd like to help locally.
What excites you about the future?
Well, for me personally, I really love a big challenge, and so for my personal future, trying to just catalyze some change in this, 190-plus-year-old company, to take them. I'm not talking about transformation, I'm talking about just, catalyzing. So that's exciting. I do think that there's just so much opportunity from a technology standpoint. I mean, if nuclear fusion happens, I've been dreaming about nuclear fusion since I was in high school. It just changes, the world. It brings energy costs down to next to nothing. And I've got projects I'm working on right now that are, envisioning data centers in space and needing materials to help survive space. Why space? There's no energy problem. There's no cooling problem. There's no water problem. The biggest problem with data centers in space? Anybody have an idea?
They're in
No,
space.
not cooling. It's almost absolute zero in space.
They're in space.
It's space junk. There's too much junk. What happens if you put this multi-billion-dollar data center in space and there's too much junk? So I'm interested in how to deal with space junk. It sounds stupid, but it's a practical. So I'm excited about the acceleration of technology. I'm nervous about the workforce and what AI means for that. So it's, as an entrepreneur, you have to be optimistic, but or I actually say as an entrepreneur, you have to be thinking about the best case and the worst case scenario all the time. So you have to be schizophrenic to be successful.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Jump ahead a couple of slides. And if you'd like to get involved, you can catch me here, talk to me afterwards, grab a business card. We do have a reception. We've got meats and cheese from the Falcon Foods. I'll also give them a plug here. Right in the Egg Side building, right next door anytime. I believe they've got some brochures out here as well. They're ready to do wholesale, retail, anything you need, or give me a call and I'll get you in touch with them. Also, our Innovator series does continue. We've got 2 more speakers and hope that you can make it back in about 3 weeks. Brooke Lee will be here. She's the CEO of Anchor Paper. They've got a location here. Think about how much paper we had in offices even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. That's an industry that has had some real challenges, and she's been able to shepherd that organization through those changes. So she will have some great stories about that. And of course, Kevin Westhouse from right here in our municipal utilities in River Falls. They're doing some really exciting things around the wastewater space, and I know you're saying, oh my gosh, not that. No, it's exciting, some cutting edge work. And great to hear. And so with that, again, I think that Lynn and Marty are all set outside. And so please join us outside and continue with the conversation. And Jeff's going to stick around for further conversations as well. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Plus,